So yeah, Dale, thanks for coming on and talking to me. People are joining us. Of course, anybody who has questions for Dale or me, you can drop those into the comments. But um, so I first met you last year, I believe, before your book came out, Afterlife of a Kept Boy, and now you've been hitting the pavement and, as one friend of mine would call it, sledding your butt to sell your book. Tell me what it's been like since May is when the book officially came out, right?
Yeah, the release date was May 15th, and I had a very busy June because it was like Pride Month, and I had a lot of different kind of themed readings, which was really cool to have so many different approaches to the text. Like I had I was I did a re- I actually um curated a reading for the Tompkins Square branch of the New York Public Library. They're
Oh, very
really
cool.
that It was very cool. That it was their Pride Month celebration. That branch of the library is very interested in kind of bringing together a collection of East Village specific works. And a lot of my book takes place in the East Village in like the 80s, 90s, and noughts. And so I brought together a group of queer writers to read about, if not East Village locale specific themes, just like some of the prevailing themes of the East Village as a locus, like immigration stories or gentrification stories or what have you. So
Hmm.
it was a really cool evening, and I read a piece about my friendship with Dean Johnson, who I don't know
Hmm.
if you're familiar with who Dean Johnson was. He was a kind of drag queen and party king on the scene. He was a kind of a downtown celebrity, and he was a dear friend of mine. And he was also somebody who I consider a mentor.
Hmm.
He encouraged my writing in a very funny and specific way, which was when I was a by the hour escort in the early noughts, I kept a diary. And Dean was my sole confidant. He was the only person in my life who really knew what I was doing at night. And I used to call him on the phone when people called each other on the phone, and I would read him excerpts from my diary, and he just found them hilarious because they were like unduly earnest for in his view. So he kind of goaded me into reading them at his literary salon, which was called Reading for Filth, where he had like a lot of like established writers participating in that, as well as just like some oddballs on the scene like me. Like Eileen Miles was one of the participants, and the late Edmund White was one of the participants, and so on. So it was like his typical mix of high and low. Um, and then some of the other readings I did, I actually was asked to do a reading. I don't know if you're familiar with this. I did not know what an ERG was when I was asked to. I had a private company uh, who had a Pride ERG, like a queer fellowship group among their employees, New York-based company. They approached me to present the book to their group for their Pride celebration.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, it was really cool. And they got a copy of the book for all the participants. And we did it virtually on Zoom just because the logistics worked out that way. But I was tasked with here's the cover of the book for all of the I love to Vanna White the hell out of this book and all my books. Um, I was asked to present my memoir, Afterlife of a Kept Boy, in a way that kind of spoke to the company's mission statement, which was, was I thought was something of a stretch, but I actually found a way. I found a way to enter the text and relate it to the company's mission. So there was that, and then I did a couple of readings out of town, like in Chicago. I read with the poet C. Russell Price,
Mm.
and his current work is all about is about ghosts and haunted characters, and he saw my text as having like a haunted quality, especially in the second section. So we had a
Mm.
kind of thematic discussion about haunted texts. And in Indianapolis, I collabed with um, a poet named Sylvia Thomas, who actually does a lot of experimenting with loops. And she took some of my texts from an earlier work from my short story collection and did some looped readings from it, which was really kind of
Oh,
fun
that's
for
cool.
me. Yeah. So it was a really cool variety of readings that happened in June, and then I just had a couple. Was just went back to Miss Manhattan for the September installation of Alyssa Max Goodman's long running memoir project, or long running, I guess it's nonfiction project,
Yeah, nonfiction.
Miss
It's
Men.
11 years.
Yeah. So that was really great because that was also in the East Village. I also read an East Village based story there, and it was a really fun night.
Yeah, we had our first New York in real life reading, and you came to it, so thank you for doing that back in May.
Yeah.
Um, so for people who are joining and don't know already, Dale's book Afterlife of a Kept Boy. I mean, I'm sort of surprised that
Well, it's trying to
a
wipe this
there you
again.
go. Put it closer so they can see the cover. Uh, so, it's funny that you say that because actually a big multinational company did ask me to do a thing about queer stuff during Pride Month, but nothing as progressive as what you were obviously talking about. Because I was talking about like the queer musicians' influence on culture in general, and kind of took people through the last 50 years of music and how LGBTQ people have influenced our culture through music. And funny enough, I did bring up Frankie Knuckles, who also is mentioned and you talk about in your book. Um, anyways, I'm just impressed. I mean, it was even when they reached out to me, I was like, oh, people are still do DEI these days because, as you know, with our current political climate, I was like, maybe no one cares about
Right.
any of this anymore, but luckily people still are doing that. And I mean, I want to dig into more topics of the book, but I kind of do want to know what it's like with everything that's going on in the world, everything that's going on in the United States. What does it feel like going around the country and talking about gay sex and queer shit while the world seems to be burning? Like, do you feel strange doing it? Does it feel like it's your form
It's
of what? Tell me.
I mean, I think the thing I do look around and say, what am I doing right now? Like, what is going on, and what am I doing, and what I mean, I confess to a lot of crime in this book also. Like, I confess to immigration crime. I confess to other so I'm definitely like there's an edge of me that's concerned, but the main thing is also like, is this relevant to this moment, this kind of spasm of this reactionary thrall that we're in the United States and in many other places in the world. And I feel like the short answer that I give myself is we just need to persist telling our stories. And I personally, one of the motivations for writing this book and also my prior book, which is a short story collection, which engages in sex work themes, was to introduce a voice. There are voices of workers in the canon, but there are also a lot of voices. There's a lot of what I would call tricklet, right? Like, so um, Garth Greenwell, What Belongs to You, for instance, is a very well-known and well-regarded book, but it's an encounter with sex work from the point of view of the trick. So I'm invested in bringing a worker's voice to the canon, and that's what drove me to write a collection of short stories, which is this book, which is published by Rebel Satori Press. In 23, Bonds and Boundaries. The central section of the book is a collection of short stories with sex work themes, and it's what's been driving me for decades with this book, because this book includes excerpts from diaries that I kept in the 80s. So I've been working towards this memoir project for quite some time. So I'm glad it's
Yeah,
out in the world. I'm this is not the world I asked for when I started writing it, not the world I imagined when I started writing it. But I think the only thing we can do is persist in telling
right.
our stories and expanding the canon.
Well, and I'm glad you say that because it's one reason why, when I read everybody saying like, I'm so depressed, I can't do anything creative, or I don't know how to write anything because I feel like the world is on fire. I do feel like doing, just as you said, telling our stories is our form of resistance and our way of not being silenced. And because it's indie and because we're not trying to make money from big corporations at the moment, then we're able to do those things. And I hope people do it. I mean, on Friday night, I was in the East Village at New York Theater Workshop watching a musical called Saturday Church. And I have to say, I was like, oh yeah, I always like, I remember, why don't I go see theater? Why do I go see shows? Why do I go out into the world? And it reminds me, like, just remembering that people are making weird, subversive, beautiful, strange stuff. And for people who don't know, that musical it's a movie that was adapted to this musical, and it tells the story of a queer young man living in the Bronx and finding the church in the West Village where people by the piers would go on Saturday and have communion with each other and support. And those places still exist. And I think queer people have been known for creating community and finding ways of resisting and persisting, as you said. Um, Even what you're talking about, being in the East Village in the '80s. I mean, uh, there's a now many people just think of it as Rent, but before that musical came out, it was a life as well. What is it like looking back on this and being like, hey guys, I've been through a lot of shit.
That's a really interesting point, and I have a really quick aside about rent because when I was living in the East Village, I think I was living on 6th Street at the time. I was working over on Broadway, so I would. This was when I got a corporate job. I would like skip to work through Tompkins Square Park and then down St. Mark's Place and get to my job. It was fantastic. As a New Yorker, not to have to commute to work, it was amazing. And one day I was going to work and I was on St. Mark's and it was weirdly empty of people, except for a bunch of folks kind of staged, like seated and leaning and hanging out in kind of wearing rags, but they were very colorful rags. They were like rags with like bold yarn stripes in them. And I was like, what is going on? Why are all the homeless on St. Mark's coordinated right now? And as I walked down St. Mark's Place, I realized I was on the set of Rent. I was on location with Rent the movie. And I was walking through what they had just staged to shoot a scene on St. Mark's Place. It was so weird. It was so surreal. But the question about like what it's like to reflect, yes, that's one. Like when you ask about like, do I throw my hands up in despair at the current situation that we're living through? Sometimes, but all more often than not, it's not about like, um, it's about like, why am I writing about the recent past? Why am I writing about the '80s? Why am I writing about the 2000s? And I do think there are lessons to be drawn from the recent past. For instance, like early 2000s, when I started to do um, by the hour sex work in AOL chat rooms, right? It was kind of that era of the internet where things were really like, it was not known. It was a frontier. It was like,
Mhm.
we didn't know what you could do with this tool, with this forum. And it was a lot less regulated and it was a lot less corporate. So, yes, there were terms of service moderators in the AOL chat rooms who would occasionally kick you out for like bad behavior. But to a large extent, they corporate AOL let me, conjure an income out of pixels doing sex work in their chat rooms for years. So it was, and we can talk about the passage of Sesta Foster in 2017, which really, in the name of saving trafficked children, right? This kind of avatar
Mhm.
of innocence, they really shut down a lot of free speech on the internet.
Yeah.
And it persists to this day. So I think it's valuable for people who are, and we're all on a learning curve with the internet, right? I don't remember asking for this either. I don't remember asking for this digital world. And whether you're, from my generation, like Gen X, or whether you're from a younger generation, we're all figuring it out as we go along. But it's good to know that the drift, the shift in online culture is towards a much more uh, constrained, censored, and corporatized environment compared to what it was when there was those early days of promise.
Right. Um, so one of the things that when you did the Queer Love Project questionnaire, you mentioned that, and I love this because I'm very pragmatic about my romantic relationship as well. But that you and your husband got married for very practical reasons, and he was born in Peru. I don't know if he's an American citizen yet, but he has a green card. So how are you guys navigating all of this right now? Obviously you have protections, or we think we have protections. People are afraid of same-sex marriage being under threat. Obviously, those of us who are married should be okay, but I don't know. Tell me what you guys talk about with all of this, and how it
Yeah.
affects your relationship.
Yeah, I mean, my husband had his citizenship before I met him, but with that said, he has he has family members who recently visited the US. We travel abroad extensively, including back to Lima a couple of times a year. And I mean, first of all, like, um, I think in I think we were together during the first the 2016 election when I I literally came home and cried for the outcome and was, like was totally fucking Cassandra about it. Like, you don't understand. I know you're not from here. This is doom.
Yeah.
And he was kind of like surprised and he was like, no, you don't understand. We've been living with dysfunctional governance for decades. And and then the second iteration of this, MAGA spasm has us more worried than ever about like just our freedom of movement, just our freedom to say shit on the internet and share things with our friends. So yeah, we definitely have had conversations about like, is our movement going to be restricted? Do we need to take care about like coming back into the country? Um, Also, one of the characters that's in the memoir, who is not named, but he's called Machito in the memoir, was a boyfriend I had in the early '90s, who's dealing with his immigration status right now, and I wound up going to like um, DSA's immigration training, like ICE Watch training workshop, so that I could like be prepared to escort him to court should the time come.
Oh
So
wow.
yeah, things are definitely as a as a mixed national origin and mixed race household, we've definitely had some thoughts about this. Yeah. And
Well,
some
since you've been through
fears.
that since you've been through that training, is there anything that you can tell us? Any advice or anything you think we should know?
I mean, I think it would be great if more people did the training, even if they didn't actively participate in like escorting people to court. But I'll tell you the main takeaway of the training. There are some practical tips like get this information, have a pen and paper because you can't use electronics and so on. There's a whole litany of practical advice. But there's the main takeaway from those trainings is this is a this is an action which will put you in despair. This is an
Hmm.
action which will hurt you, which will bring you to despair to observe. So be prepared for the emotional toll that you're going to pay. That was the main lesson of those trainings, which I find, it says a lot already.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to make too much of a association with it, but I mean, that just reminds me of the training that people gave to each other, um, you know, during the AIDS crisis and during, having to support each other outside of the government wasn't helping, or, the
Right.
healthcare system wasn't helping. So people had to self-organize. So it sounds like that has some parallels.
Yeah.
Anyway,
That,
that's good. I mean, it's sad, but good advice.
yeah. Except this time the government is the source of the despair.
Right.
Right.
Which is which has happened before.
Yeah.
So I know the first part of the book, going back to your book, it starts in, as you said, like you're detailing times from your diaries and from when you were a sex worker in the 80s. And then and the way you've talked about it is you said that the first part is solar time and the last part is lunar time. Tell me a little bit about what that means.
Sure. So the first half is a fairly linear presentation of the time I spent as the quote unquote kept boy
Mhm.
to a British society decorator who I met through my college roommate. And I thought I was going to get a because I was a young I was a young sexually confused college student who was studying architecture, and here was this kind of society decorator. I thought I was going in for a job. And I actually did do some work with him. So I did some draftings, and we, most of the job entailed having lunch, drinking, and then going to like fabric stores and terrorizing the clerks of the fabric stores. But that was my understanding of what I was getting into. His understanding of what I was getting into was more of a romantic relationship. So I was like on a weekly stipend, and I was his I was his paid companion for about 10 years. So the first half of the book is a fairly linear in the sense that it's linear time, and the way I think about it, it's the way solar time beats. It's like the sun rises and sets, and it's a fairly relentless pattern, regular and relentless. There is variation to it, but it's a fairly regular and I relate that to the fixated gaze of the decorator upon me as
Mm.
the object of his obsession. And then the second half of the book is me as an adult, in my 30s and on, trying to disentangle myself from that relationship after the decorator's death, kind of like shaking the ghost of my sugar daddy, shaking that kept boy label. And that story gets told not so, it is fairly linear, but it's more in phases. Like, so this was this was the phase of my recovery from drugs and alcohol. This is the phase of my sex work. This is the phase. So it's more vertical than linear time. It's more like it plunges into themes. Each chapter plunges into a specific theme. So I think of it as more like lunar time, like the way the moon has phases. My
Mhm.
life, the afterlife, following the death of the decorator,
Mhm.
occurred in more lunar cycles rather than
Waxing and waning, and yeah.
than hewing to solar time. Yeah, so that's what I
Yeah.
mean by that.
Well, one of the things that you write in the last part is how you did try to find something to love in all the men that you spent even an hour with. And I thought that was really interesting, and it showed a level of empathy that I think also comes through in your writing, in the sense that one has to be empathetic when you're talking about other people, either even if you're trying to imagine the way they think or the way why they're acting that way. But tell me a little bit about how you came to understand that, because I would assume when you you're a sensitive young man, maybe there were moments where you didn't love all these people in some way. What does that mean when you say you tried to love them?
Sure. So when I was kind of under the cone of the decorator's fixation, I had a hard time, kind of finding that kind of compassion or empathy or love for him. A lot of the reasons being was that that whole relationship was built on a lot of deception, which I, unpack one I learn about in the aftermath of his death. When I was later on in life, when I was in my 30s, I was a by the hour hustler, like working out of the AOL chat rooms. And I felt like it was redemptive for me to engage sex work in that way compared to the way I fell into it in my 20s, because it was strictly on my terms, right? Like I set the terms. And then what I came to understand is like, even if it's just an hour or 2 hours, I really did find something to love. I appreciated the opportunity in a way to redeem myself in this way, to be able to set terms, to be one on one with another, I mean, most of my clients were gay men, although there were a few straight couples and a couple of women in the mix. Just be in, in an intimate, even a transactional but intimate setting with them, and have some, have an authentic connection with them,
Right.
which was absolutely missing from the kind of fraught and obsessive relationship with the decorator. Um, so I did find it redemptive. I say in the book, I practiced love on my clients, and I needed the practice after spending a decade with somebody who just could not bring his authentic self to the relationship.
Does that mean you also gave good boyfriend experience on top of the sex?
I mean, I was I was cast like we all have, like, what is it? Every pot, there's a lid for every pot.
Right.
I was cast by a couple of my clients who became regulars as the quote unquote Guido stud for hire. One of my clients who wrote a review of me, that this was another thing about the early internet. There was a well trafficked review site where clients would review the escorts they had hired, and it was a pretty reliable source of information for other people looking to hire. And one of my regulars described me as an Italian stallion dream come true. So I was I was fulfilling a very specific fantasy of this kind of blue collar Italian American, either from Brooklyn or Long Island. I leaned into the speech patterns of my hometown. I delivered a kind of fantasy of a kind of like, Guido stud.
Right.
And it was it people really liked it. It was a very successful marketing approach. So, and then like if you had regulars who would get to know you over like months or years, you can kind of get under the hood of that persona and be a little more authentic with them. But that was the main kind of persona that I inhabited as a by the hour sex worker.
So, one of the things I'm curious about, because you mentioned that there is this canon of sex work literature. We have, City of Night, John Ritchie, and then many other fiction and nonfiction works, including a lot of documentaries and movies. And so, in some ways, it becomes like it almost becomes romanticized. I know I went through a phase in my 20s where I was like, "Oh, maybe I should be a hustler. Like maybe that's what I should do for a while just so I can get some experience." And my boyfriend, who's now my husband, was like supportive of it. He's like, "If you want to, go ahead." But then I decided, no, maybe I like my relationship to sex the way it is and don't want to screw with it. So what do you say to people who kind of romanticize it and think, maybe I'll do this for fun, or maybe it's, the cute thing to do.
I mean, I'm not gonna I'm not gonna moralize. I feel
Right.
like there are, I've met young men who, really got into it just to get over on a few guys for a little while. I got I knew real careerists. I was kind of something of a careerist. Like, I was very diligent about it. Like, I kept a spreadsheet and I tracked my
Mhm.
weekly sales, and I was very entrepreneurial about it. My friend, the late Dean Johnson, was also a late to life worker, and he was on a very different tip. He was like more on the drama therapy reenactment tip. Like he brought psychodramas, and the clients were kind of asking for a kind of psychodrama. I think, I'm not going to say all sex work is valid. I'm just going to say that there are different modalities, just like in a lot of other professions. And my approach was specifically like very careerist. I cultivated a crew of regulars. It was my full time profession. I had a cover story, which was like everybody else thought that I was doing, freelance event work, which
Right.
I did do, and I did occasionally do a freelance event job here and there, but my main gig was by the hour sex work. So I've seen a lot of different modalities of how people can conduct sex work, and now there's like, the OnlyFans generation,
Yeah.
right? So the modality shifts.
Yeah. This is slightly related, but I'm curious because everyone was reacting over the last couple months to some of the magazine articles that have been revealing some parts of gay male life with the Sniffies app. And there was an article in New York Magazine about our peak gay sluttiness. And I don't know, what was your reaction to all that? Did you read them? Did you care?
Um, I really like Sniffies personally. I'm like of all the apps, I really like its like map-based approach. I think it was developed by an architect, so that I studied
Yep.
architecture, so that kind of tracks. Also, I get a lot of play on Sniffies, even at my advanced age. For all the young guys with daddy fixations, I'm there for them.
Right.
And my relationship with my husband is open. Like we have these kind of rules where we like can play when we're not in the same city, which is fairly often because both of us travel for work. And I consider myself a spokesmodel for Sniffies because they invited me onto the first season of their podcast, which is called Cruising Confessions. And I spoke about my interest in like diary keeping, and especially like I write a lot of like travelogues. Like if I spend a
Hmm.
week in a city, I tend to write like a sex travelogue. And so I like kind of document the sexual encounters. But I believe in ethical sluttiness.
Yeah.
Um, you know, like the campfire rule, like y- leave the campsite cleaner than you found it, maybe.
It's a good one.
Yeah, leave footprints or handprints, but
I mean, I have
leave
been
them there.
happy to see that there have been so many books and people writing about cruising, and that younger generations seem to really be curious about it. For those of us who were alive before the internet, it was normal. But we also didn't, we just learned about it on our own and kind of figured it out by the seat of our pants, not with all of the instructions and apps and technology. So that's been interesting as well.
Yeah,
And
I actually wrote an essay about that, and it was published in a West Coast kind of queer zine called Fruit Slice, which was called um, Analog Codes for Digital Cruising. Which because yeah, I absolutely came up in like analog era cruising, like in Central Park and the Ramble, for instance, where there were a certain set of patterns of conduct, like you could kind of the shuffle or the circling or what have you, or the tapping. And that doesn't really exist digitally, but there are some kind of like common, like I do think some of it comes through. And also
right.
I think that might be, like the interest in I know I meet these young guys who have never had an analog experience of cruising or sex. It's all their entire sex lives is digitally mediated. And sometimes I sit them on my knee and I explain to them what it was like in the analog era.
Just doing the Lord's work.
Exactly. Somebody has to out here.
So a lot of the people who are probably joining us are writers like us. And, but if you're not, people often ask, like, why do we do this confessional writing? Why do we pour out our secrets? And, I teach writing and it comes up all the time. Uh, and, we started off at the beginning talking about why telling our stories matters. But tell me a little bit about, I mean, you've had great mentors and people who've supported you in writing groups and that sort of thing. I don't know. Give us a little bit about why you think it means so much to us, or why it matters to you.
I mean, I think it's important that I, I do think it's important that this particular story is out in the world, however it's received. I do think you know, there's, there are some, yes, generations of queer folks who could benefit from understanding this story. I also do feel like so much of what I've written about is retrospective, like looking back without, without being, I'm trying not to be sentimental about it. I'm trying to bring it to relevance to today. But I do feel, and I do have another writing project on the horizon, which is also kind of a look back project. But I do, just as a personal journey, I feel like I do want to like exercise, the past with some of these writing projects. And then, who knows what will open up once they're out in once they, they're out in the world and have their own lives. So I don't know if
Mhm.
that answered your question, but that's
No, it does, but I mean, do you ever have people come up to you and say like, "Teach me how to do this"? Like, why should I tell this story, or how do I tell this story?
I do get a lot of questions about sex work, kind of along the lines of what you were saying, like a little bit of a like guys who take a somewhat romantic approach. It's so funny. Years ago, I was I don't know if you remember, there was a site called rentboy.com.
Yes, I actually presented a couple of awards when they had a big award show in Chelsea one year.
Oh,
I
that's
think I presented an award for like best boyfriend experience to one of the porn stars or something.
amazing. Well, I was the advice blogger for
Ah,
rentboy.com. I never actually advertised on rentboy.com, but I had a column called Ask Dominic, which was my sex worker name, where guys would write in with questions. Some of them were the clients and some of them were the workers. Some of them were the escorts. And I would answer these questions based on my experience. And from that, I got invited to be on Dan Savage's podcast because he had a question from a straight guy asking about sex work. He wanted to be a straight sex worker. And it's so funny because
what we used
I
to
was,
call a gigolo.
yeah, he wanted to be a gigolo. He was like,
Yeah.
he had that gigolo, American gigolo fantasy, right? And I was like, he was like, any advice on how to break into the industry? And I was like, there is no gigolo industry. I mean, it's like it happens, but it's not like it's not an industry. There's not enough. Most of the demand for sex work comes from men, not women. So like this fantasy of being a straight gigolo is mostly for most people, it's a fantasy. But so that was my answer. But you wouldn't believe for years, I still get them emails that because that column recirculates. I get emails from straight guys like, "Dear Dominic, I really want to become a straight escort. Will you, a straight a gigolo for women? Will you please give me some guidance? What do you think?" They send me their photos, ask me to rate their photos. Like it's so crazy. The fantasy is so ingrained, and that's the straight mindset. For gay guys, there's like um there is a mix. It's definitely like there's a certain like there's some circles where it's really dispelled, and they don't want to know about it, or it's like it's just like oh it's looked down upon. But there is also some circles where it's like kind of romanticized.
Yeah.
Also, I have told, young readers like, yeah, this is basically read this as a manual on how not to be a cat boy. And, maybe you'll figure out for yourself how to actually be a cat boy.
I mean, what's interesting about that is that I've met many young guys who do have that fantasy of having a sugar daddy or are looking for it. I guess it's similar to the trad wife fantasy of like being able to be taken care of and do your thing. It persists. It's
Absolutely.
all fantasies too. So,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right. So people should
Absolutely.
get Afterlife of a Kept Boy. So it's a manual of how not to be a kept
How, how, yeah. Object lessons and how not to be a cat boy.
boy. So you
Because I was
mentioned
a
that you have other
terrible cat
writing,
boy. Mhm.
you have other projects that you're working on. I don't know, just as a little bit of a like uh, as we're wrapping up, like, do you tell us when do you write? What is your way of doing it? Do you write in the morning? Do you write? Everyone always asks those like kind of questions. What are your answers?
Uh, Well, there was like a full year with this book where I wasn't writing. I didn't have a regular writing practice because I was so involved in the business of like getting it published, the cover art, the blurbs, the reviews, the readings. And only recently did I get back into a regular writing practice. And I tend to uh, push out a bunch of pages in the mornings, but I can also go on like long obsessive jags. if I'm like deep in a project.
Yeah.
Right now I do like having multiple things at the same time. And right now I'm lucky that I have like three very distinct projects to be working on, a couple of essays for and on very different themes for anthologies that I've been invited to participate in, and I'm working on a full length biography of. I was asked to participate in a documentary film, a feature length documentary film about the life um, and death of Dean Johnson, my old
Yeah.
friend and mentor, which came out this year. It's called The Big Dean Johnson, and it's on the festival circuit right now. It opened at Slam Dance in Los Angeles in February. I was out there. I was out there for the premiere, and it's on the festival circuit, and the director is, hopefully, and probably looking for like a streaming deal. So I hope more people see it soon. I'm one of the talking heads in it, talking about Dean's life and his work. And that film having come out really prompted me to start looking into a full biography of
Oh,
Dean
wow.
Johnson to really get into like what drove him as an artist and the kind of spiritual component of his life and work as a drag performer and fronting two bands and being like a club promoter in during the Giuliani administration, where he was
Yeah.
like kind of hounded out of nightlife by that mirthless jerk that was our mayor for a couple of terms. So yeah, that's I'm currently working on that. I'm doing a lot of like research into like 80s East Village scenes at the New York Public Library. They have like incredible
Yeah.
resources in this direction. So yeah,
Very
that's where I'm
cool.
at right now.
Um, and I know that you published this book with a small press, and I read in your Memoir Land Q&A that that was a good experience, but partly because it had a deadline, so you had to send it in, and then it got selected.
It's so funny. I'm somebody who really likes deadlines as a writer. Like I need deadlines. And I was working on a revision of the text, which was based on this theme of like the first half being solar and the second half being lunar. Just organizing the text that way. So I was doing a whole pass through it to get into to like to s- to make sure that theme was resonating throughout the text. And CNR Press is the press that publishes. So they're a small press based out of North Carolina, and they had a call for nonfiction. They award an annual nonfiction prize, and the deadline was like a deadline that was convenient for me to like finish this revision. So I was like, okay, I'm going to enter the text to that contest just as a deadline for myself. Zero expectations of an outcome with that. And then I was floored when they called me and said, we've selected your memoir as the nonfiction prize winner for that year. And, which included a prize and and a publishing contract. So that's how I published the memoir. And it's definitely a challenge to work with a small press in these times because of like the distribution challenges.
Right.
But I definitely have like the press is solidly behind, and it's not a niche queer press. It's more generalist. So this is like a queer work that engages in some thorny subjects that they got behind and they're fully behind it. So I really appreciate this. So I there's definitely some limitations in terms of like distribution and like getting attention from reviewers and so on. But having a small press in your corner is also, quite nice.
Well, but you're doing the work, which I also appreciate because I think a lot of writers forget that even if you have a big press, you have to do the work.
Oh yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And I've heard from friends that with contracts from big presses that it has its own perils.
well, I'm glad it got published, and I'm looking forward. I'll give you a deadline, Dale, if you want to write something else for me. I love giving deadlines to people.
Yeah.
That's the editor in me. Uh, I give assignments and deadlines to people all the time. Do they always hit them? No, but it's okay. Um, So this has been fun. I'm glad that we've been talking about doing this. I know you're going to be going out to Cherry Grove, a safe space. So enjoy the end of season in Fire Island.
Yeah. Yeah, I bought I with a friend, I bought a small house in Cherry Grove in 2001 or 2, right after 9/11, and we were like, "Let's go to Cherry Grove. Let's spend some time out here after 9/11." And, it's normally rented, but this is the end of the rental season, so I'll have it for myself for a week, and I'm, looking forward to getting some writing done out there and some reading.
Very cool. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks Dale, and we'll see each other soon.
Thank you, Jerry. Thanks, everyone. This was fun.
All right, bye.
Bye.